So hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for tuning in. This is Steve Taylor here, and welcome to my podcast. And what, for those of you that have listened to this before, I really appreciate you coming back. And for those of you who are brand new, welcome. And let me give you a little background of our podcast. We'll go introduce our wonderful guests, and then we'll go from there. So primarily this podcast has started where I come in, I interview business owners, talk about all the different challenges and items they're having in their business to hopefully give those nuggets of wisdoms and pass it on to you, the listener. But at different times, I come in and we have our topic where I bring in what I would consider experts on a certain topic, and we talk about that, right? And these topics will hopefully be able to help you in your business. And today, I'm really excited to have this conversation. This is a new relationship for me. But I feel we'll become fast friends, for a long time. It's a really, really interesting topic. But before we mention the topic and we go into it, Steve, Steve spells his name the right way and everything. Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Thank you for having me, Steve. Steven Steers here, native of New York City, now living in Mexico City, and I am a sales consultant and author. Sometimes I get on stage and speak in front of groups, and my work is the nexus of where storytelling meets sales and meets sales training. So I work with a method called context selling, where I help people derive the context that AI can't give them from call recordings. I do call reviews, train reps, and train teams, and eventually help founders fire themselves from sales. That's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. So Steve, our conversation is really timely, right? Because I'll tell you what you don't know about me. Some of our listeners probably know. I have a wife that is an actress, and she's a performance artist, and she goes out and she performs her story. Her biggest performance was her story and going through it. And over the years, as an attorney, as an advisor, I've done some casual, we've done some improv, tried some stand-up comedy. I'm always fascinated by great storytellers, right? And how they go through the process of the story, how you engage people, lead them down the road. I'm always practicing, this technique. So story selling, let's start with what is story selling? Give us your definition so people know what it's out there. What I'm sure it's a term that goes around at times, but just to let people know where we're starting from.
Yeah, absolutely. So my belief in stories is the following. The whole reason you tell a story is to better help your audience, your prospects, your clients tell their own story. The whole thing is to help them better tell their own story. So when we think about that as a framework, it's not about you. Your story is not about you. It's who you can affect with that story and how you can help them move in their own life to maybe take some action that you potentially want or that's mutually beneficial for the two of you. So when I think about storytelling or story selling, it comes down to 4 questions that I think people should ask themselves, be able to answer, and that will inform which stories they tell. So the first question for anybody who's thinking about telling a story, especially in a business context, I think, is what's at stake? What's the big picture thing that's happening in the industry or inside of a business, or that's going to make a business owner be like, I need to learn about this. What's going to happen here? And we want to think about that as in like, what happens if no action is taken, or who's going to win this thing, or who's going to lose it? So once you know what's at stake, an example I'll give, before we started recording today, Steve, we would talk about AI, right? Everybody's talking about AI. What is it going to do for business? Is it going to be this beautiful thing that brings us all to the promised land of ease and smooth and growing businesses, or is it going to take away jobs? Nobody knows yet. It's still too early to tell, but everyone's paying attention. That's a thing of an example of what's at stake. There's going to be winners, there's going to be losers. And if you frame that first, you're going to be able to start to know which stories to tell. The second question you want to ask is, what does your audience, clients, prospects, whoever you're talking to, want to learn or achieve about that thing that is at stake? So what things should I avoid? How should I be thinking about this? How can I be successful in this new world with this stuff that's happening to me? And if you can frame that now, if you're creating content, writing stories or otherwise, it's like, oh, I can teach you how to be more successful leveraging AI in your legal business, as an example. The third question, and this is where especially your wife's work is very prescient. How do you want your audience to feel? This is something I think we're missing a lot in business these days, is where everything is very sanitized. And I'm not saying things need to be super emotional, but if you look at the science behind how people buy things, 95% of purchasing decisions are made subconsciously. So we make every decision with our animal brain, and we make decisions on feelings, whether we like to or not. That's just the way we're wired. But we then back into it with that remaining 5% of logic. So if you can label how you want people to feel, and you can act in the corresponding way, create that type of space inside of the story you tell, you're going to create that emotional cord with a person that's going to help them get into a decision-making mode.
Mm-hmm.
And then the final question to ask yourself, and this is one I see a lot of people get wrong, is what do you want your audience to do next now that they know this information? So if you run yourself through these 4 questions, and then you make yourself a story bank, this is something that applies anybody in any business. Write down the stories that happened in your life. Write down things you find interesting. Grab memes that you find funny or that have some type of lesson to them. Put them in a folder and have all this stuff ready for you, and you'll be able to deploy them in the right context. And it'll make it much easier for you to ask people what they should do next.
That's awesome, Stephen. You know, when you're going through that, I love how you categorize it with those four elements to go through kind of the structure of a story, right? I think back to my joke telling, right? Or there's a cool Netflix show on there, The Art of Film, that there's a structure to a good joke, right? The setup and all the like, and you go through it. And I'm thinking through, you know, as I'm going through, I always think Jerry Maguire, like, help me, help you, right? You know, to go through that. So when you're going and you're doing these stories, right? I think yours is maybe you're helping them out, maybe it's written, but I think a lot about like what it's in person. And I was at a meeting this week where this one guy, he was great. He was very funny. He had a story for everything, and he would go through it to illustrate that point, right? But he got so much in his story as a little tone deaf. And I remember I was telling the story the first evening there, and my wife and I had a very eventful trip, car ride to the airport. And I was kind of going through it, and I was trying to go slowly, and I was engaging different people at my table throughout the process, right? And the story kind of took on a life of its own because they started adding these elements to it, right? They say, well, what about there was a cop involved and there was my son involved, right? And they kind of pull those off. So when you're going about and you're studying the structure, right? And you're trying to sell your story, at what points or how do you get, or what do you think the value of is getting that customer or that client feedback to kind of help you develop your story?
Yeah, great question. I think that's the whole point, right? So we have our initial story that would get people to potentially like come towards us, right? I'll share a quick story about this too. But we have our initial story that gets people to come towards us. And then, as I said, the whole point is to get your customer to better tell their own story. So you want to have their feedback. So you might be sharing a story, for example, like, right, you're a financial planner. You may be talking about how you've helped some of your clients realize their financial dreams faster in better investments because you really understood not only the market conditions, but what they were really shooting for. So you could make better recommendations for investments based on that. They're retired, they bought that house, they paid for their kids' college, whatever those things are. You want to play on those elements to be able to then help that person see themselves in the action. There's a quote by I think it's a Roman or a Greek philosopher named Horace. I write about this in my book, and it says, you need change only the name and the stories about you. So we always want to say, whenever we're sharing a story, hey, does that sound like something that would be useful or helpful to you? And now we're entering into a place where they can give us their feedback. Yeah. Because it's like, yes, of course I want that. Yeah, why wouldn't I? Tell me how. And
I feel it's important. What I like, Steve, is to be kind of very vulnerable. And in your example, that's a great one. This is how I help that client. But let me tell you about me, right? Let me tell you why I do what I do, or let me tell you these mistakes that I made along the way. Because I get a lot of people that, that come in and they feel a little bit ashamed. Hey, I don't feel I made the best decisions that I could have and gone through that. And I want to get them off that. So I really like to share different stories about myself and different vulnerabilities and to kind of go through with that to help them, right? To help yes. Get them to where you go. I mean, what element of that, and I think a lot of people telling stories or sharing, they question, I don't know, how vulnerable should I be? I'm very vulnerable because I'm asking them to be vulnerable with me because that's my nature of my business. I need to know that about you. But vulnerability and those personal stories, I mean, how do you think, are they best all around, or maybe certain situations you shouldn't use them, or where should that come into play?
Great question. So I say that there's 3 types of stories anybody has. And then we could run through where they fit in context. So the first is like mission. So you mentioned this is why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
What's the inciting moment that made you say, hey, I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to practice law. And I'm going to become a financial planner. Like, what made you do that? That's interesting. That tells me about your why. The next is your vision. So this is more of a bigger thing for your potential company. This helps you attract talent. This helps people row in the same direction if they're on your team, and helps people kind of be in lockstep. The good thing with vision stories is they're really helpful in the bigger the vision, the more people are going to pay attention, and more they're potentially going to want to lend their skills or assets to do that. And then the third, you mentioned like mistakes you've made. I call these milestone stories. Like what have you been through that's been really difficult, and like how did you persist? These all help to create a little bit more space around the capacity for people to tell the right story. So as far as vulnerability is concerned, I think if you run it through the 4 questions we did at the start, you're going to know where it fits because it has a point. So for you, someone who's skilled like you are, right? You understand law, you understand logic and reasoning. We were talking about before we started recording, and how to help people make decisions. You are helping guide a person in the right direction with a story that has a purpose. So you mentioned that one guy who had the meeting, he had a story for everything, but it was kind of like starting to get tone deaf. That happens because that's his tool to share information, but it's also like, what's the point of all these stories? It's getting past the point. So I think for anyone who's planning on using storytelling, if you run through the 4 questions, you'll know what level of vulnerability is going to be there, because you're already saying, how do I want these people to feel? And then you're saying, what do I want them to do now that they feel this way? Which should cut off a lot of the gritty or inappropriate details around how vulnerable you are. But it's good to be vulnerable. I think it's important. It just matters what direction you're pointing the person in with that vulnerability, and what outcome you're trying to help them get to by sharing that story.
I love that, Steve. As you're going through, you're giving this process, you're giving these tools, and you're saying, hey, listen, be attentive, pay attention. Try to see see where the mood is shifting. And let me go in that direction, because I think that's really, so important. I always say it's not that it's easier, that it's more, I find it a little more doable when I'm in a physical room with someone, right? And kind of reading the room and reading their emotions. Sometimes electronically, you're not able to, although we're all getting much better at it, I think, right? I feel like I don't feel, like you really are 3 feet in front of me, right? You're not in Mexico City. We're all getting comfortable with that. But when we say stories, and my wife went through this a lot of, with people on my side, this were their money stories or their backstories. A lot of people get stuck in their story, in this repetitive story of saying, I'm not good enough, or I'm just going to make that error again, or different, items. So when we go through the process and we invite them and we get them to share their own story, tell us about your story, and it kind of goes down this negative road, right? Which I find that happens a lot. How can I help in that process to kind of, like you say, the 4th one, where do I need them to go? Where do I need to take the action? How do I help divert that to kind of a more positive road, and not falling too deeply into like becoming their psychologist?
Man, that's a timely question, because it's funny with consulting and lots of things around business owners and business people. At some point, it just descends into therapy. There's no way around it, right? You've built trust with somebody, they feel comfortable telling you certain things. And I find business is a mindset sport more than anything else. But that's a whole nother tangent we could go down later. I think it's how you start and create the space for the person to tell their story. So it's like, for example, for you, like, let's say you're helping someone build out a financial plan, and you want them to be like, no, the future looks bright. You could say, so tell me a little bit about like your past financial life and the life that you want to leave alone and move on from. So we framed it. I can tell you about all these struggles. I'm late on all my bills. I'm not saving any money. I'm not meeting the maximum for my Roth IRA. Okay, cool. So that's the old you. Let's talk about how we can build you into the new you, and then talk about what those goals are. So I would put some guidelines or guide rails around that negative or not as positive experience, and place it as a thing of the past, and then help them paint the future they're looking for.
Yeah, I like that. I like to when they come in, I say, listen, we're a judgment-free zone. We're going to address what's been done before, but we're not sitting in that, right? We're not slapping ourselves because we're moving on, right? There's no judgment for that. We're only like saying, okay, what's our next best action? And what are these things here with us, moving forward, right? Where do we want to go, and to try to get them and keep that conversation, going there. So I really like that advice, Steve, and that's what I try to do, and continue to give them permission to release that part of their life and move forward into it. But now when we look over, and I think this maybe goes more into where your business is, and we're creating this story for a brand, for a company, right? What are some good ideas and tips? It sounds like, what you're doing when you're going out there, when you're trying to build your story. Like, for instance, we've had a story of my business up to a certain point, and I feel it needs a refresh, right? I think some of the terminology being used is a little old. I want to redo this. I want to give a new feeling or something to it. So when you're looking at a business and you're looking at that story, what are some good ideas, to kind of build your business story, and then kind of continue to carry it forward? And I think because we all want it to kind of innovate, right? To be able to change and grow with you, to continue that story of your business and get that communication out there.
The first thing I would do is similar advice I've mentioned earlier. Every single business owner listening, write down a story bank. And you could follow the three guidelines of mission. Why are you doing this? Why is this the problem you chose to solve? If you own a business, you could probably make more money, depending, working for somebody else, at least in the interim, if you started one. So like, why did you choose this? Why is this the problem, the inciting thing that you're like, I have to dedicate my time and time away from my family potentially to do this? Why did you do that? Get really crystal clear on that. That's going to form a lot of things also. It's going to have you have that extra clarity of why you get up in the morning and why you want to serve the people you want to serve, which I find helps with the whole mindset thing we talked a little bit about earlier. Mm-hmm. The second thing is understand what you're pointing towards. What does it look like when your mission is complete? That's your vision. Who do you want to help? How many people do you want to help? What does the world look like when you've actualized that? And then milestones. How have we gotten here? So when I say milestones, it's obviously you as a person, as a business owner, what's difficult things you've been through, but also your clients. When they come to you, like for you example, they may be in shambles financially, or maybe they're doing fine financially, but they want to be doing better. Where were they when they started? And then where have we helped them get to? What did we help them to achieve? And how have we got them through that place? Mm-hmm. The whole thing I would say there is once you have that bank, it becomes very clear. Oh, this is a really good story that illustrates who we are, why we're doing what we're doing, and how we can help people. So the main reason I love storytelling, besides there's so many reasons, but one of the things I really like is it kind of just echoes my business philosophy, which is we're humans solving human problems in a business context. Mm-hmm. So I think if any business is not using stories, it's like your business is not as human as it could be, because I got to like you first before I'm going to worry about what product you have. And so if you're talking to me about other people who have been in the same industry as me, who have had similar financial trouble, but are now like their stuff is all lined up and they're on pace to retire 5 years earlier. Well, geez, I want to learn, right? Yeah. That gets me to come closer to you and potentially want a little bit more of what you have. So those would be some of the ways I would think about it. But more than anything else, just get a bank out there and start riffing through what you have, and you're going to really see what's going to work, because people want to hear from you first.
Yeah, what I'm hearing, Steve, this has been great. You're really, I'm learning a lot listening to you, and because I've gone a lot through this studying of marketing and branding and a personal brand versus a business brand, and kind of my takeaway, what I'm kind of feeling is that my personal brand, I feel I can be very personal. Like, hey, this is about me. This was my mission. This was my vision. These were my milestones, right? This is what I've learned. But then I'm thinking when we're talking about the business brand, this needs to be more about you, right? You, the client. This is what we've done for other people. This is our mission, is to help you this way, to help you in that way. That's where all those stories come. And that's kind of, that's a different line of stories, right? My personal versus my business. So when I'm looking to, refresh my brand, right? Personally, I've been a brand for a long time. And I have those two sorts of stories, right? My personal, this is Steve. Yeah, I'm the founder, but if I want to be bigger than this, it needs to be more than just me. And this is my business. Those personal versus business stories, how should I mix those? What are your thoughts on mixing those going forward as I put those stories out there?
I think it totally works well, right? You're obviously going to always have the personal brand. People are going to hire Steve to maybe go on stage and talk in front of a group of people, but your business, what's behind it all, I think it's totally fine to share like why you started it. Like, hey, welcome to our business. This is exactly why we do what we do. Here's where I was before I started the business. Here's why I thought this was important. And here's how this is going to affect you going forward. Right. I think they mix. I'd say I would lean mostly on the milestone stories for sharing stories from the business, because it shows where people were, what they were feeling at the time, and where we got them to, because that helps see like, oh, I want those results. Obviously, Steve and his team know how to do this. They know where I'm at and they know how to get me to the next place. Those are the ones I would leverage the most. But I think if you can show yourself as part of the business too, that lends a lot of credibility, because people buy people first.
That's great advice, Steve. A big thing in my business is, for the first time, the Security Exchange Commission is allowing advisors to use testimonials, right? And so I'm trying to figure out my strategy around that. And brother, I'm taking your advice right there. I'm going to focus to the clients on a milestone story. Hey, rather than just saying how great we are, can you tell us where you've been, where you are now, why you're happier? That would be impactful. That's a huge value that you've brought into me here. I really appreciate it. I'm going to jump all over that idea.
Take it, man. That's so cool. You get testimonials now.
Yeah. This is brand new. We're all kind of slowly going into it and figuring it out, because all the different rules. But it's exciting, right? To be able to go through that. So Steve, listen, I found this extremely helpful. Before we wind up, we're going to put a lot of information about you and your company, so that people want to find you and stuff like that. Through this, a timely message or anything out there about story selling or otherwise, a little message you'd like to put out there before we wrap up?
I got a quick one. Stories close the sale, never the conversation.
I like that. That's awesome. That's awesome. And we're going to end on that note. Steve, I really appreciate you, man. And this has been a great conversation. I really liked it.
Likewise. Thanks for having me, Steve.